5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
High and low, it's how I roll. A shooting star in a film noir. I'm floating around 10 feet over the ground. I'm floating around 10 feet over the ground.
Ho, 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 and Merry Christmas to everybody. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to spend it with me over the holidays. I can't tell you how much that means. So much. Charlotte J, Legacy Nicely Training, Hanger One, whoever you are tonight. John Ayers, Ristel, nice to see you guys. Carolina Puerto, ¿cómo está mi amiga? ASPA 60, hey, how are you? Nice to see you attending as always. I think I said John Ayers already. Ristel, Sharon, nice to see you. Hope all you guys and any new listeners had a wonderful Christmas. As usual, questions in all caps, chat amongst yourself, keep it in lowercase. Subscribe, like, do whatever you want. Pass it along. Just try and enjoy your time today. Today we're gonna, because I had to rush through the end of tree structures and experimental design, I want to kind of recap that rather briefly after my story. And then we'll move on to the title concept of the show today, which is, can legal evidence concepts be applied to Bigfoot evidence? Excuse me. So, and again, I apologize for repeating a story. It's the best evidence story or questionable evidence story that I've got. So I'm going to repeat it again. Hey, Janky 1044. My first expedition went out with 3 other people out onto a point that overlooked the valley. The main researcher was sitting at 12 o'clock looking over the valley. I was sitting at 2 o'clock looking over the valley, and Garrett Strobel, good friend of mine, was was on the left-hand side looking over the valley, and that way we hoped to cover 180 degrees around us. So we were looking, not much happening. To the left of where we were sitting was a feeding meadow with endive. The meadow was planted with endive. And if you looked out over the valley from that meadow, you could see what we thought was a Squatch highway going all the way down the mountain to the river, and then across from the river going all the way up. So we were optimistic that we were going to have some action that night. As we were sitting there, I noticed a firefly in the sky. And you know how fireflies usually just kind of float along and hover and move rather slow. This firefly was darting back and forth and zigzags and doing loops. And I said to the main investigator, look at that. It's a dying firefly. And after I said that, and as the firefly was zigzagging around, it was doing that the whole time, but in a descending pattern. And the main investigator starts looking at it. I think that could be a mini orb. A mini orb? Come on, guy. That's a firefly dying. No, I think it's a mini orb. And about the time he said that, it hit the ground right in between us, and the light went out. Oh, that's a mini orb. It was just absorbed into the ground. Write that down. Write that down. Come on, buddy. That was a firefly. It just landed on the ground and died. No. It's a mini orb. Write it down. Write it down. It was about 10 o'clock at night when this happened. So first expedition, first time out on my first expedition, I wasn't going to get into a power struggle with the main researcher. So I wrote it down, and reluctantly so, but I wrote it down. So about 5 minutes later, we're sitting there, still no action. And I looked down at the ground, and at virtually the same second, the main researcher looked down at the ground. And as we both looked down on the ground, you saw the firefly light up again. And I looked at him and I said, a mini orb? No, that was a firefly. And so that kind of resolved that issue. What we thought was evidence was in fact firefly evidence, not mini orb evidence. Last time I told this story, I had forgot. I've since spoken with Gary Strobel, and he reminded me of this. As we sat there for about another hour, some nuts were falling from the trees, branches were falling from the trees, and again, the main researcher heard what he thought were bipedal footsteps, and they're about 20 feet behind us was kind of a little blind. And he says, I bet you that's a Bigfoot that has snuck up on us. And no sooner he said that, you heard another branch fall onto the ground. And so we all got up and we went and checked out this blind. And there was no Bigfoot evidence there. It was just a branch falling on the ground. And I use this story in my bias story to demonstrate investigator bias. But I think it also shows how our experiences, the researcher had quite a harrowing Class A encounter a month or so before. And ever since then, he kind of had Bigfoot on the mind. And it kind of shows how our previous experiences can bias our current experiences and make us think that we're getting evidence when in fact we're just experiencing Mother Nature in all her glory. So, we're in a dicey, I don't want to say business, we're in a dicey hobby. There are lots of things we've got to rule out before we rule Bigfoot in as evidence. So having said that, we will move on to the recap of tree structures. And I'm just going to try and hit the highlights here, not many details. In my book, Psychological Horizons in Scientific Bigfoot Research, which is available on Amazon, it's going to be reprinted by Doug Hychek's publishing company, complete with QR codes, so you can scan it into your phone or computer, and it'll take you to the reference that I included in there, and you can see and hear some of the stuff that was merely referenced in the book. It's going to come out under the title Grasping Sasquatch, the same as my podcast. But right now that's not out, so the original book is still on sale at Amazon. And the best way to find it, there are lots of Bigfoot books on Amazon, is just type my name in, John S. Baranchuk, and then with a PhD behind it, and it'll take you right to the book. If not right to the book, I'll be about the second one down when you scroll it. But the reason I began to propose psychologic science for Bigfoot research is because I thought it was an ideal fit for Bigfoot phenomena. Um, when we go out to look at Bigfoot, of course, we all want to have that Class A experience. We want to be switched from believers to knowers because we saw one up close and personal. But mostly what we deal with are Bigfoot phenomena. The outgrowth or the behaviors of Bigfoot, the tree knocks, the footprints resulting in foot casts, stone clacks, howls, tree structures, you name the Bigfoot phenomena, that's the most typical thing you're going to experience when you go out onto a Bigfoot expedition. And so psychology, what we study is human phenomena. We can't see intellect or thinking or cognitive abilities. We can't see emotions, as in we can't see those things churning inside the person's body or in the person's mind. What we see is the manifestation, the phenomenological manifestation of emotions, thoughts, intellect. We see the behavioral manifestations of those things, not actually where they originate. So we're looking at human phenomena in psychology, and those things can be very difficult to analyze. They can be difficult to tap into, just like Sasquatch is difficult to directly observe and analyze. But we do more frequently experience Bigfoot phenomena. And since psychology can put numbers, analyze and put numbers to Bigfoot phenomena, it seems ideally fit for investigating Bigfoot. And that's one of the many things that inspired me to write my book. So in the last show, we were talking about how we could do some experimental designs with Bigfoot tree structures. And most of you, I'm sure, have some knowledge or remember what they appear to be. In the opening slide, you saw a teepee structure there. And of course, when we see these things, we attribute them to Bigfoot. But in many cases, just based on their size, you can't be sure that Bigfoot made them, because a lot of the Bigfoot structures are structures that we attribute to Bigfoot could also be made by humans. And so I started to think about how could we tease out whether humans made those Bigfoot structures or whether Bigfoots made those Bigfoot structures. And there's an experimental design called an A-B design. An A-B design is just comparing two different groups, Group A and Group B. So in one of the proposed experiments, we just set up an area where we can measure only humanness. We're sure only humans are going to be interacting with that area. And then we find an area where there are Bigfoot structures. In the original show, I told a story about a woman who did some remote viewing and then took the group through the woods, and they came across a virtual grove of Bigfoot structures, tree twists, teepees, balancing logs, asterisks, all kinds of Bigfoot structures in abundance. And so the simplest A-B design would be to measure the area, just because we're trying to replicate everything that we're attributing to Bigfoot. And let's say that the area was, I don't know, a half acre, whatever those dimensions would be. So in this area, we're measuring, if you will, Bigfoot phenomena, or the essence of Bigfootness. Because typically they're in a location that's hard for humans to get to, but for the experiment, the more remote and less likely even Bigfoot researchers are going to get there, would be an appropriate thing to find. Measure that area, and then go to an area where you can only measure humanness. A radical or extreme example would be go measure a half acre down in Times Square in New York City. Obviously not going to do that, but I use that example to get my point across, that we're looking for an area where we only expect humans to be and no Bigfoot to be. So the A part of the design is where we're measuring Bigfootness up in the remote mountains. And the B part of the design is the area where we're measuring humanness only. And more realistically, if you live a little rural and you got a half acre of land, you could just portion out a half acre of land and just watch that half acre of land. So you watch the half acre of land for a week. You count the number of structures, tree structures. Let's use TP designs. The number of TP designs that show up in that human area. Then you go back to the Bigfoot area that you found and count the number of TP structures or other structures that show up in that area and see if there is any change, if more have been built. You do that over a period of 3 to 4 weeks, each week, counting the number of TP designs or other tree structures that are happening in your human area, and compare that number to the number that are in your Bigfootness area. And then you simply, in counting them, you simply begin to total them up, compare the number of new structures that have developed in the Bigfoot design area to the human area, and then see if there's a significant distinction or difference between the number of new structures that have been built in that area using a statistical analysis. And if you find a significant greater number of structures added into the Bigfoot area than into the human area, then you've got scientific evidence that shows Bigfoots are building significantly more TP structures or other tree structures compared to humans. And it allows us to begin with some confidence and scientific confidence, attribute tree structure building to Bigfoot, because we've isolated the Bigfootness and we've isolated the humanness. You could do that same thing, your two separate areas, and you could, on your humanness area, if you just want to up the ante a little bit, you could build a TP structure. Let's say you're going to be in a national park with a very populated and isolated area for humans, and you're finding the structures, the TP structures, way up in the mountains. Now, this is a little risky because sometimes Bigfoots do come in to camping areas, but the same kind of deal, except now in the human area, you're setting up a TP structure, kind of maybe even encouraging humans, if you will, to add to the TP structure that you've got. And again, on and on and on for a 4-week period, you compare the number of new TP structures in the human area to the number of new TP structures in the Bigfoot area. Check for significant differences with a statistical analysis and see which area had more TP structures added. Now, the next three I'm not too thrilled about to talk about, because although we don't have an ethical code for interacting with Bigfoot, I think it wouldn't hurt to have one. No matter what's your theory, whether you believe they're forest people, whether you believe they're a relict hominid or an ape, whether you believe they're interdimensional, and irregardless of what degree of humanness you believe these creatures have, I think we should still treat them as if they have respect from us and rights from us. And so no one's ever written a an ethical code, but there are some ethics out there. If you get into where you're certain it's a Bigfoot area and you're in their home, don't go shining your lights onto the doorstep. Don't be loud and obnoxious around them. Would you want somebody shining lights in your home at night? Would you want a rowdy crowd outside of your home at night? And those are just kind of informal, talked about them on expedition codes of ethics. But at some point, somebody's going to have to develop a formal code of ethics, maybe get together a committee and develop some codes of ethics for us to interact with Bigfoot. But since we don't have that now, we can be typical human beings, I guess, if we want to, and just disregard their rights. And so one of the alternate designs here, the third one down, go into a Bigfoot structure area and destroy a TP structure. Have your TP structure in your humanness area, and then over a period of weeks, monitor if the one in the humanness area gets destroyed and or rebuilt, and in the Bigfoot area, monitor if the TP structure that you destroyed is rebuilt in that same location, or whether there's another TP structure built in its place. Again, science comes down to a statistical analysis, so you've always got to end up doing some math. It's not enough just to count, there was one TP structure destroyed and 3 new ones built in the Bigfoot area, and there was no TP structures destroyed in the human area and no TP structures built. So you got 1 destroyed, 3 new ones built in the Bigfoot area, and none in the human area. So you can't just say, well, the score's 3-0. That proves that it's Bigfoot. You've got to take those numbers and you've got to analyze them with a statistical analysis to make sure that the difference is a significant difference in terms of standard deviations. You've got to analyze it to make sure that it's not being caused by random error. And then you've got to use your experimental design to make sure that those aren't being destroyed or rebuilt for what's called systematic error. And if you don't know what those words mean, that's okay. At some point, I'm going to be brave enough to do a statistics and experimental design show, probably a 4-series show, because it's not easy to teach. But you got to make sure it's a statistical difference, and that difference is due to Bigfoot rather than random error or systematic error. Another design would be to, rather than having a separate human area distant from the Bigfoot area, you could create your human area within the Bigfoot area. So the Bigfoot has a small TP structure, or a small blind. Right beside it, you build as identical to as you can a human teepee structure or a human blind, and try and match the structures, developing and building human structures next to the Bigfoot structures, and then just monitor and count the number of human structures torn down and or rebuilt by the Bigfoot. In this case, they would be rebuilt, and monitor the number of Bigfoot structures torn down or new teepee structures rebuilt. Statistically compare the two. Again, we're trying to extract the human influence and separate it out from the Bigfootness influence, if that makes any kind of sense to you. Let's see, destroyed, rebuilt structures and Disney. And then you could replicate that. You could set up back to the two separate areas. You could set up the human area with more than one TP structure, if the Bigfoot area had more than one TP structure, and then destroy one of the human structures. And again, I shudder even saying this. I hope it doesn't come back to haunt me, because this is not something I want to do. But destroy a Bigfoot structure and see which the human area or the Bigfoot area gets those structures rebuilt, and compare those to for significant differences. So, in summary, we're trying to isolate the influence of Bigfoot building structures from the influence of humans building structures, and by counting, basically compare the number destroyed or the number rebuilt in the human area and compare it to the number destroyed or rebuilt in the Bigfoot area. And because they're separate areas and we're controlling for Bigfootness, and we're controlling for humanness, the human area, in fact, is your main control group, so that you can compare the human influence to the Bigfoot influence and see if there's a difference there. Is this making sense to y'all? You following me in terms of trying to extract the phenomena of Bigfoot from the phenomena of humanity? Any questions, folks? Going once, going twice. Sold. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the title of this episode, which was, can concepts of legal evidence be applied to Sasquatch evidence? I couldn't fit evidence in the title and keep it a single line. So on the promotional literature, let me digress here. Let's see what Janke has to say. Though I understand what you say, I will have to leave the structures out of my data collection. And I think there's something to be said for that. Again, I don't know how much humanness, if Melba Ketchum's analysis is accurate or not. But as most of us are probably aware, she found a large percentage of Bigfoot and then a much smaller percentage of human DNA markers in the Bigfoot DNA. So even though her study has been largely discredited, and that'll be another separate show that I will take on, although her research has been discredited, even that discredited research at least can inspire the notion, or begs the question as to, is there human DNA, and is Bigfoot a cross between a human and a Bigfoot? And so even with that suggestion, I think, in my opinion, we owe them respect. those experimental designs that I showed you, if you want to be less invasive, you could do the same things with tree knocks. Do tree knocks in a solely human area and see how many returns you get. And then do tree knocks in a solely Bigfoot area and see how many returns you got. So, and Jay is just raising the point there. Jay Fritz is raising the point that, it's part of Mother Nature, and I'm not sure exactly what he means by Mother Nature. That could be that the Bigfoots are part of Mother Nature, but again, anytime you're looking at tree structures, Mother Nature also can influence leaning trees that end up looking like arcs and things of that nature. So, back to can legal concepts of evidence be applied to Sasquatch? This, for what it's worth, this drawing here was done by Terry Thomas, and this was the original draft for the cover of my book. And I just want to share this with you because it's kind of fascinating. The book is providing scientific evidence in the hope of eliminating the need for a kill approach to Bigfoot. And the inspiration for the drawing was Lady Justice, Blind Lady Justice. If you've ever seen the iconic image of Blind Lady Justice, it's a woman with a blindfold on her holding a sword in one hand and then the scales of justice in another. And so that's what inspired my idea here for Blind Bigfoot Justice. And again, this was the initial art. Many people commented that the blindfold actually looked more like sunglasses, like it was a cool Bigfoot. I thought that was pretty valid evidence because they kind of do look like sunglasses on Bigfoot. So the final version of this, the blindfold is much more obviously a blindfold. To me, being a psychologist, you'll notice that the scales are tipped, with the shotgun being raised higher than that size symbol that's up there. And so the point being, psychological science should outweigh the no kill or the kill approach to Bigfoot. But, when you get your PhD in something, you can lose track of how immersed you get and how something that is obvious to you wouldn't necessarily be obvious to other people. And people that didn't know the size sign, they were wondering, what the heck is that sign? Why is that sign being given more weight than the gun? Because they didn't recognize that is kind of the universal symbol for psychology, or in, I don't know if it's a Greek or Roman alphabet, psi. So in the final design, there's a stack of psychology textbooks on that scale. And rather than going with a shotgun, which I really don't think would do much, that's one of my biases towards Bigfoot. I don't think a shotgun show would do much to a Bigfoot. So in the final design, we went with a higher power rifle. Anyways, that's a little off topic, but I came up with the idea, and then Terry Thomas, a great researcher in himself and a great artist, executed it. So, legal concepts of evidence. The educated, informed, and prepared Bigfoot researcher needs to understand and consider the types of evidence they are gathering in the hopes of informing and hopefully protecting the species and its habitat. There is potential value in any form of evidence, but different types of evidence have different levels of such intrinsic value. And I think that's what's valuable in doing this. The legal system weighs different types of evidence more heavily than other types of evidence. And as we know from the scientific community weighs different types of evidence heavier than others. And the primary type of evidence we have to offer up is anecdotal evidence. And science doesn't give much weight to this. I had written the book 3 years ago, but what inspired this becoming a topic was it's a follow-up on a show on evidence. But Brian King Sharp, in one of his shows, made a comment, seems to me we have enough evidence to convict Bigfoot in court of being Bigfoot. I thought that was an awesome statement, because if we were in a court of law, we probably could prove with the evidence that we got that Bigfoot exists. In court, the only reason I know this is I was an expert witness in some cases when I was a psychologist. In court, you've only got to tip the scales from 50% to 51% to find a person innocent or guilty. Just that 1% difference determines which way the pendulum sways in terms of evidence or guilt. The 1%, tipping it from 50 to 51%, the scales, or from 50 to 49% to find them guilty, that's not much of a difference. And so the threshold for legal evidence is much lower than the threshold for scientific evidence. To prove something scientifically, you need to prove that there's a 95% chance that your findings aren't due to random error or systematic error, that you're not making a mistake in your conclusions. So 95% that you didn't make a mistake versus only 51% that you didn't make a mistake, there's quite a difference. And so unfortunately, we're not being judged in the court of law. Our evidence is being judged in the court of science. Nonetheless, I think scientific concepts of evidence have something to offer us. Oops, excuse me. And what do we start with? I think I missed one. Analogical evidence. Yeah, analogical evidence. Telling a story that draws an analogy or parallel between Bigfoot and other species thought to be similar to or otherwise possibly represent Bigfoot. In my opinion, and despite using it in this book, this is of questionable to little value until we have studied the species with scientific or other forms of certainty. And this runs rampant. This analogical evidence runs rampant and actually drives our hypotheses and theories. People come up with the analogy that they're relic hominids, or that they're like primates, or that they're like interdimensional beings. And it could be any of those, or other types of evidence will eventually prevail. I really don't know what Bigfoot is or its origins, because all we have is analogical evidence and some of the other types of evidence that we're going to be discussing. But the type of evidence that we have, unfortunately, is viewed by science as very weak evidence. Let's see, we got a comment here. Legacy nicely trained dogs. My dad used statistical analysis to prove versus disprove reliability of a dog in court. Yes, Jessica Nicely is a awesome, I think, a world-class dog trainer. She herself was trained by her dad. And, it's interesting. I think the reason I put this up is because it can be used in studies with dogs, science, and the reliability and validity. And she and her dad originally trained canines for the police. And in some of our conversations, she showed how certain police are trained to kind of give the dogs cues and lead the dog to searching in certain areas for the drugs or whatever the case may be. Whereas your more reliable and your stronger canine dog will not need those cues. They'll use their own nose and search those out. Clever hands effects is what she's saying that is. Without the confidence, any analogous relationship between Bigfoots and humans, other known hominids, great apes, other apex predators, or other wild species is strictly theoretical and hypothetical. And yet we've all staked our ground, not all, but many of us have staked our territory. They've got to be flesh and blood. They've got to be a relict hominid. And then when we look for evidence, we draw the comparisons between that evidence and how the particular theory that we endorse, what that means about that theory. Again, that's confirmation bias. And unfortunately, that runs rampant in the Bigfoot community. Anecdotal evidence. Here comes another biggie that people are no doubt more familiar with, that's used in courts, but it's a big one for Bigfoot. Presents only anecdotes that support a particular conclusion. Consider it with skepticism and in combination with other more reliable kinds of evidence. That's taken from the court text, the legal text that I used in this research. Anecdotes are stories, albeit they short, amusing, and interesting stories about a real incident or person or creature. Although they can be factual and precise, they are often considered an account regarded as unreliable and hearsay. They can also be imbued with analogical evidence and or bolstered by testimonial evidence. As such, they can represent some of the most or least compelling Bigfoot evidence, depending on the character and the reliability of the storyteller, and the personal objectivity and validity versus bias or outright lies of the data and the story. And to their credit, BFRO has a system set up, and they interview these people with these sightings very effectively and efficiently. But it still boils down, the problem is it still boils down to human judgment. You're making a judgment and looking for inconsistencies or consistencies in the stories, and you're trying to judge the honesty of the patient, or not patient. I'm sorry, I'm flipping into psychology here. The honesty and credibility of the storyteller. And, trained psychologists are poor crystal ball gazers. And so to think that we can, with high validity, tease out a story and know that it's an honest story and judge the character of the person telling this story, we're kind of self-deluding ourselves. And that's one of the reasons an earlier show was the bullshit detector for storytellers, looking at their eye movement, because that just gives us another set of data to look at. I'm not sure how many people caught my appearance on that Bigfoot show with C. Wayne Tethero and Brian Sharp, but there was another psychologist on there from the UK. And it was interesting that the two psychologists were pretty much on the same page. But she gauged the honesty or credibility of the person telling the story by kind of the structure of the story and the sentences. So that was kind of interesting. Jenky's got a question here. What if it's in conjunction with video or audio? On one hand, Jenky, I think you raise an excellent point. There's something called concurrent validity. If you've got one piece of evidence that points to Bigfoot, and then you've got two other pieces of evidence that also point to Bigfoot, they concur, they agree with each other. And that's called concurrent validity. And that certainly adds strength to the conclusions that are made around those things. But you got to keep in mind, and we'll get into this either this show or the next, that video and audio are not without their failings. And there's something called black box phenomena, whereby, we don't know what computer program is in there running that FLIR, or we don't know the transformations. They can say, oh yeah, well, we're filtering out this frequency of sound and that frequency of sound, but that's done through a computer program. And I highly doubt that there are very many Bigfoot researchers that actually understand the computer language that goes into designing those tools to get it to work the way it is. And in fact, we're having to take a leap of faith that, when we depixelate a picture or a video, or when we add pixels to a picture or a video, we really don't understand the underlying program that's causing that to happen, and therefore what it's objectively what it's doing for the picture or the audio or whatever it is we're analyzing. So it's a double-edged sword. You're certainly better having three pieces of evidence associated with Bigfoot to converge, or concurrent validity, convergent validity, all pointing to the same thing. You're certainly better off with three pieces of evidence than one, but any evidence, there's no evidence out there that's 100%. And I would go as far as saying that's even true for science and experimentation. No one has ever developed the foolproof experimental design. Everything has its strengths and weaknesses. And rather than just looking at an image or an experimental result, we've got to understand the process that was involved in coming to those images and experimental results, so we can truly understand the strengths and weaknesses of the evidence itself. Awesome question, Jenky. Let's see. Interestingly, this evidence all seems to represent the most common evidence communicated by texts and writings on the Bigfoot subject, and is responsible for creating a plethora of what broader society call Bigfoot experts in the field today. More often than not, this is a good thing for the writer, speaker, or expert, but may or may not serve the species in a beneficial fashion. Witness internet sightings posted on any number of websites and pages online. There are no Bigfoot experts. There are a lot of people who know a hell of a lot more than about Bigfoot than I do. I have some expertise in psychology, and I'm trying to bring that to the search for Bigfoot, but I am far from a Bigfoot expert. Character evidence. This is a testimony or document that is used to help prove that someone acted in a particular way based on the person's character. In legal settings, this can be used to prove that a person's behavior at a certain time was consistent with his or her character. It can be used in some investigations to prove intent, motive, or opportunity. This is a testimony or document that is used to help prove that someone or something acted in a particular way based on their character. Also known as indirect evidence, this type of evidence is used to infer something based on a series of facts separate from the fact the argument is trying to prove. So again, this comes back to, what's the character of the storyteller? What's the character of the interviewer? Some storytellers have gone as far as submitting themselves to lie detector tests, signing affidavits saying they're being honest. And again, that indirectly bolsters the strength of their story that they're willing to do that. Excuse me. It requires a deduction of facts from other facts that can be proven, and while not considered to be strong evidence, it can be relevant in an investigation. That's a quote. Here I weigh in. Hopefully it will not surprise the reader that it is my belief that we know little to nothing scientifically regarding Bigfoot's character. Nonetheless, the character of a person providing or citing other forms of Bigfoot evidence would be well considered in evaluating the reliability and validity of that evidence. In short, you got to consider the source. I'm not sure. I wanted to say something about that. It has slipped my mind. Again, my bias is that we got to bring science to the process, and we've got to stop relying on our human powers of discernment of people and the animal, because all those things are potentially hopelessly biased. Digital evidence. Now, here we go. Digital evidence can be any sort of evidence of a digital file from an electronic source. The computer has all the answers. This includes email, text messages, instant messages, files, documents extracted from a hard drive. Audio files, video files, digital evidence can be found on any server or device that stores data, including some lesser known sources, such as a GPS and internet-enabled devices. Digital evidence is often found through internet searches using open source intelligence. Investigators need to either develop the specific technical expertise or rely on the experts to do the extraction for them. Preserving digital evidence is also challenging because, unlike physical evidence, it can be altered or deleted remotely. Investigators need to be able to authenticate the evidence and also provide documentation to prove its integrity. I find digital evidence to represent some of the best, yet some of the most problematic evidence available in Bigfoot. For example, digital versus digitized video images. An image that initially looks like what many researchers call a blob squatch, a blurry, amorphous, nondescript, unidentifiable image of what is thought or hoped to be a Bigfoot, are subject to the projective inkblot-like interpretive bias by the very nature of their vagueness. For those of you not familiar with the Rorschach or the inkblot test, they put an ink block in front of you and you tell them what they see. You project your own issues, your own psychology, your own thoughts onto that image. And, when we start altering the pixels of these images to clear them up or clean them up, but it can first be blown up for clarity. Very often, this only results in a larger image with the same blob squatch, Well, that's only because the camera wasn't stationary when the images were taken. Never fear, digital stabilization technology is here. Now the blob starts looking increasingly Bigfoot-like, but still nondescript, to be sure. Well, we'll just clean it up. Well, that's only a profile shot. We don't know how it would appear if we captured the entire creature. We'll do facial reconstruction and body reconstruction programming with rotational enhancement to help. By the time we've done, we've got a Bigfoot looking image. The computer doesn't lie, right? My problem is I don't know if the computer lies or not. I don't believe that I, like many versus most Bigfoot researchers, only have a fundamental understanding of the technology and don't really understand what the human conceived, designed, programmed, and constructed software and hardware is actually doing to the image. Well, it's depixelating the image, just taking out the blurred pixels and replacing them with non-blurred pixels. Oh, really? And how does the computer decide which pixels need to be replaced and what to replace them with? Truly, I don't know the answers to these questions or even if they're the right questions. I also have no doubt someone does understand it well enough to pose more valid questions and answers to these. My point, however, is researchers are making research decisions and drawing conclusions based on these stabilized and enhanced images without having an intimate, in-depth knowledge of the inner workings of the technology to know how the images are or could be altered that image. Without that level of understanding, it appears to me we're still risking the ink blot effect of seeing our own wishes and biases rather than knowing what if we're looking at objective data. Can you, as a field researcher, honestly say you understand the inner workings of your digitally enhanced data images or sound recordings to know how they are being manipulated by a computer program and be certain that the software or hardware are not creating false images, sounds, or graphic analysis of the same thing you then risk misinterpreting? Do you have an intimate enough knowledge, understanding of FLIR and night vision to do the same? How do you know if you haven't written the program or speak the program's language to understand those influences? Without that understanding, you're dealing with what is known as black box phenomena. In science, computing and engineering a black box is a device, system, or object which can be viewed in terms of its inputs and outputs or transfer characteristics without any knowledge of its internal workings. Its implementation is opaque or black. If we don't understand how the programming is analyzing, changing, and reconfiguring our data to produce the revised output, that output should be viewed with skepticism at best, in my opinion. It's a serious problem, but at the moment it is limited to the very large deep learning models of neural networks. These neural networks break down problems into millions or even billions of pieces and then assemble them step by step in a linear fashion to solve them. Because the human brain doesn't work that way, we have no good way of knowing what exactly the algorithm is doing or what methods it's using. This has been called the black box problem because during these times of AI, it seems to emulate a black box that has no way of looking, that we have no way of looking inside. This not only prevents us from gaining the deep insight required to tweak the algorithms, but it causes all kinds of issues with trust. In my opinion, it should create issues with trust, but does not do so often enough in the Bigfoot field. And I wanted to wrap up with Miss Nicely. The computer is still a tool that is operated by a human who has bias. Yeah, and you know, on one side of the coin, it's a tool And the more tools you have in your tool bag, the better off you are. But this, this part of what I'm saying is particular poignant. Well, it's depixelating the image, just taking the blur out of the pixels and replacing them with not blurred pixels. Oh, that seems like a good thing. Oh, really? How does a computer decide which pixels need to be replaced and what to replace them with? As in one way, especially with the video and picture technology to refine things or further distort things, because we're looking for Bigfoot, we can keep refining and distorting to the point that we got the image we think it should be. In effect, we're creating our own Bigfoots through the technology refining processes until they reach the criteria that we think proves that it's a Bigfoot. It's akin to drawing or coloring the Bigfoot in there for ourselves because it's not clearly evident in the original picture. And I would encourage all my viewers and listeners to just think about that a little bit, because we really don't, most of us really don't know what's going on with those computers and the transformations of what it's doing with data. Well, I've ran a minute over time. I apologize for that. We're going to pick up with more legal concepts of evidence and continue to discuss them in our next show. Continue to have a Merry Christmas. Remember to keep your mind open, your boots on the ground, and your heart with your higher power. Good night. Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.
I see you running out of reason. Don't try to blame it on the seasons. Why you wanna walk away? When we began, swear we had something that would last. Baby has a feeling best. Falling in was easy. How do I make a stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Oh, I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in was easy. How can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Tried and true. I will never let go of you. Tried and true. I me go back to the start. I'll never let go of you, tried and true. I'll never let go of you, tried and true. Tried and true.
Wanna do it all with you by my side. If you're in, meet me here tonight. Be brave and come along, I'll be alright. Promise we